Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. This was one of the best moments in this dialogue between Tucker Carlson and Bishop Barron. Let's watch it, and then I will have a few concluding remarks.
One of the reasons I think Christianity is true is because so many people hate it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Jesus is really the great dividing,
He
the
always
great
has
divider. Yeah. And like, why would you be mad at Jesus or Christianity when it's like a nonviolent religion that teaches people to love each other? If you're mad at that, it says something about how real it is, I think.
I agree. Both Billy Graham and Fulton Sheen, I mean, arguably the two greatest evangelists of the 20th century, said the same thing, which was the objection to God is rarely truly intellectual. It's a moral objection.
Totally.
The moral demand of God, it becomes too great. See, Jesus, if he's one spiritual figure among many, he's a great teacher, like the Buddha, he's like Muhammad, he's like Confucius. Well, then I can kind of handle him. I can put him in a corner and say, okay, that's interesting. I'll abide by some of that. And I also like what the Sufi mystics say. And I also like what Moses says here. But see, Jesus, as C.S. Lewis saw so perfectly, is qualitatively different than that. And that's why he's a problem. Because if he is who he says he is, not just one teacher that I can listen to, but he's God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father, as we say every week in the Creed.
Through him, all things were made.
Yeah. If that's who he is, well, the game's over.
But why does that make people mad? I mean, one of the late life revelations in my life has been that these great spasms of violence, these revolutions that we study, French Revolution, Spanish Civil War, Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, huge parts of World War II, were anti-Christian.
Absolutely.
Like, the point was to murder Christians.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's not recorded that way.
Yeah, but that's true. Yeah, but see, Jesus, he's a problem because of who he says he is, but also we're sinners. And so sinners don't want to get out of their sinful patterns. We're way too comfortable. It's like the Israelites that want to go back to Egypt, right? They're on their way to liberation, but oh boy, did we love the flesh pots of Egypt. At least we had cucumbers and right.
It's my favorite part.
Right, but that's the story of every sinner. Is every sin is a type of addiction. You're addicted to, that's the principal. And so as I'm trying to move toward conversion, I'm moving across the painful desert, right, on the way to the promised land. I'm always hankering for Egypt. And so Jesus is a constant reproach, a constant challenge, a constant no. So of course I'm gonna resist him. Look at, the very fact, I think this is very interesting. Muhammad dies in his bed full of years. The Buddha dies in his bed full of years, surrounded by his disciples. Confucius, the same thing. Moses dies at the age of 120 or something, And then there's Jesus, who dies 30 years old, naked, pinned to a desperate instrument of torture. His disciples having abandoned him, his enemies mocking him. That's how he dies. Now, what does it tell you? It tells you there's something about him.
Well, who would write that? By the way, if I'm trying to create a new religion,
no way you'd write.
He's not the hero I'm creating at all.
No, but it's a sign. He's a sign of contradiction. He's the one that's the way the world is going to react to him. Now, what's the good news? The good news is, having endured all of that, he returns. And I always think of this, if we were, Hollywood's telling the story, you never heard the Jesus story, but here's this guy with this horrible thing, and these people betrayed him and denied him, and they crucified him, and now he's back. He'd be back with a machine gun. I'm back for vengeance. He's back with shalom, a word of peace. And the way I put it in Christianity is this: we killed God, and God returned in forgiving love. And that's why, as Paul said, right, I'm certain neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else could ever separate us from the love of God. How does Paul know that? Because we killed God, and God returned in forgiving love. That's salvation. That's the word of grace, if you want. That's the good news. That's what they went careering around the world to their deaths proclaiming, was that. Paul, I preach one thing, Christ and him crucified. Because that's the message: is we killed him, God raised him up, and he returned in forgiving love. That's the good news.
Do you think that Christian persecution is on the rise?
Oh, I know it is. It's documented. 20th century was the worst century for Christian martyrs of of Christian history, all the previous centuries combined. There were more martyrs in the 20th century than any other time. We think about the early church; they were all being persecuted.
Yeah.
Far greater in the 20th century. Now, around the world, we are by far the most persecuted religion. Absolutely, and it's a crime. It's an outrage, and we talk about in a kind of demure way about religious liberty in our country, which is indeed under threat. But you want the real threat to religious liberty. It's in different parts of the world. People are being killed for their Christian faith.
So why is that fact suppressed? That is intentionally suppressed? Again, I was like 45 before I realized the Bolshevik Revolution was aimed at Christians. I don't know why I didn't get that, but I didn't.
Yeah, I have to ask the keepers of the flame culturally, but it's simply the case today. I mean, it's the most persecuted religion. We can look at things from different angles, I suppose. One tragedy, let's say in the 20th century, if you have World War I and World War II, yes, there are anti-Christian elements to be sure. I mean, Hitler is deeply anti-Christian, but you also had French Christians killing German Christians, killing Canadian Christians, killing American Christians, killing Russian Christians. It was this massive Christian slaughter bench. And my pet theory is when you go to Europe today, especially parts of Europe, and you see a kind of spiritual wasteland, I think that's a big part of it. Is
I agree completely.
We're just recovering from this horrific outbreak of Christian on Christian violence. The gospel, did that get into anybody's mind and heart in the 20th century that allowed this orgy of violence to take place?
What do you think that was? Why the 20th century?
Well, you could do
so much darker than anything that happened in the Dark Ages.
You could do the Leo XIII, who gave us the St. Michael prayer and who supposedly had a intuition or a sense that the 20th century would belong to the devil. And to my mind, it's kind of hard to argue with that. If you believe in the devil, as I do, and you see what happened in the 20th century, it's kind of hard to imagine it wasn't to some degree.
Well, nuclear weapons are proof, as far as I can tell.
I know. I mean, the mass destruction, mass death of the 20th century. It's hard to blame that simply on political reality.
Totally. Wait, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. I'm so sorry. You said Pope Leo XIII?
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean? He had this sense.
He had a mystical experience of the devil would have a unique control over the 20th century. And so he formulates the famous St. Michael prayer that we still pray in many churches, asking for the protection of Michael the Archangel.
When did he have this experience?
Toward the end of his life. So he died 1903. So it would have been like around 1900, so late 19th century. And many would say, well, it was borne out by the 20th century.
I would
for me in my own lifetime, when I was a young guy going through school, we were still very much formed by a more liberal Catholic view. The devil, literary device, a symbol, for evil. Don't take it literally. It's not
you were
real.
Taught that?
Yeah. It was sort of the standard view. But what really convinced me powerfully of the devil's reality was the sex abuse scandal. Because you look at the sex abuse scandal, which has haunted almost the whole of my priesthood. It broke in Chicago in the early 90s. I was ordained in 1986. So most of my priesthood has been under the shadow. The clergy sex abuse scandal has adversely affected the church in every possible way. And when you look at it and you say, could that have just been an accident or just human folly and sin? It seemed to have been so designed by a wicked mind that wanted to undermine the church. But then now look at the whole 20th century and the level of destruction and degradation. It's hard for me to imagine it's just because of political forces or cultural
agree more.
forces.
I've come to this conclusion recently, but I think you're exactly right. So what's the St. Michael's prayer that was...
St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. I won't get it exactly right, but it's an invocation of St. Michael to defend us in battle against the devil who sends his minions for the destruction of souls. So it's a very conscious awareness of the presence of evil in the world. And
Pope Leo said, the 13th said, I think this century is going to be
would belong to the devil. And he formulated that prayer to be prayed in Catholic Church.
What do people say when he said that?
I think most of them follow him. I think most of them, we start saying...
Because, 1903 was a period of great hope in the West.
Yes. which is fascinating to me. And there's a magazine called the Christian Century. It's a Christian theological journal, and it was born at that time. And that was the idea. This is the Christian century.
Yes.
That progress and economic progress and
Dominating the
political
world.
and the social gospel, and this is our century. And then it didn't exactly work out that way. Leo intuited or had a mystical experience to the effect that it would belong not to the Christian churches, but to the devil. So, we got a battle on our hands, but we mustn't forget what we were saying earlier. Where sin abounds, grace abounds the more. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church. That image too, I don't know why, but for most of my life, I am, okay, the gates of hell will not prevail against it, which means somehow hell is going to come against us, but we're going to win the battle. But that's not what it means. The gates would be the weakest point of a city wall. And so when you're attacking a city, you go after the gates. So what the Lord is saying is, no, you're not defensive here. You're on the march. You're on the offensive, and the gates of hell will not prevail against you. You're going to win. You're invading hell, and it's not going to prevail against you. So it's like not a cowering, like, oh, we'll put up a good defense, and I guess we're going to
or move as far away from hell as we can.
We are on the march.
Move to the suburbs.
No, but see, one of the problems is when Christians forget that and they hand the world over to pure secularism or whatever. Well, of course, we're not going to do well in the battle. But when Christians know, no, our job is to be fully engaged in this great struggle. And we're going after you, hell. We're coming after hatred, violence, stupidity, superstition, scapegoating. We're going after you. We're on the march. When I was coming of age, we didn't have that language.
All right, we're going to go ahead and end it there. There's lots of different things going on within this clip, and I think that this was the best part of the conversation between Tucker Carlson and Bishop Barron. Why? Well, mainly because of their talk and kind of their dialogue around Jesus and who he is. It was interesting that they referred to Jesus as a problem divider, a reproach, and a no-no. I think that many people like an idea of Jesus, but when they're confronted with the reality of who the real Jesus is, they actually get mad about it. Tucker Carlson actually asked the question, why are people mad about the truth, the realism, the reality of who Christ is? And as Bishop Barron mentioned, as many people have also mentioned as well, it's often Billy Graham, he cites, and Fulton Sheen are two propagators of this viewpoint. But our objections to God are not rational usually. They're usually a moral, there's usually a moral an immorality or immoral issue at play there. You want to stay in sin. You want to keep on doing what you're doing. So you don't like a God that tells you that you can't, or that you need to accept him by faith and find grace in his name, or you're going to a place you don't want to go. People don't like that Jesus. They like the Jesus that they can consume. They like the Jesus that will, just be happy with every decision that they make, a Jesus that will come alongside of them and be a therapy for them in their darkest moments of life, but a Jesus that actually commands and bids you come to and follow me. That's not the type of Jesus that people want, but it's precisely that Jesus who died for us. And I love how Bishop Barron summarizes it. He says, we killed God and God returned in forgiving love. Now, that poses it in a positive light. There was some negative insights or kind of a negative approach to how to think about this issue. But when you really think about it, our sin killed God, and God doesn't kill us in our sin, but rather forgives us and gives us love, mercy, and grace. But then again, that mercy, that grace, that love doesn't leave us where we're at, or it doesn't just walk alongside us and let us do whatever we want. It actually transforms us. It actually changes us into the type of people that God wants us to be. That's the main part of what I really liked about this clip. Obviously, they get into the 20th century and many different things around that. Very fascinating. I think Bishop Barron literally said that probably, I think he was quoting somebody else, but that the devil owns the 20th century. And when you think about World War II, Hitler, and even the great optimism that many Christians had during that time, only to be just completely bombarded by the sin nature in the true evil that is within this world. But then again, and I don't want you to miss this, because if you've heard my Tim Tebow example, I'm not going to explain it in this clip, but Bishop Barron talks about the fact that we are not on the defensive as the church, we are on the offensive, and really we are going to win, and not just win, we are going to absolutely destroy the enemy that is the devil, the fallen worldly systems of this world, because Christ doesn't just barely win. He doesn't just barely make it. He doesn't win 30-27. He wins 56-0, to continue my football analogies, or my metaphor, whatever that is, my examples. All right, that's all I have for this clip. Let me know what you thought about this dialogue between Tucker Carlson and Bishop Barron. There's nothing more exciting to me when two people sit down, especially celebrities, especially people that have influence within the culture, and they talk about Jesus. That is awesome. And that's what I love about many of the different YouTube channels and where they're going in talking about the most important issues, but also the most important person, that is Jesus Christ himself. All right. Peace, y'all.